this concept from like third generation warfare to fourth generation warfare is very complex, in that to be good at fourth generation warfare, you have to be good at the third generation warfare stuff. I believe that wholeheartedly. It's like math is a pretty good analogy, in that like you can't do calculus unless you know how to do arithmetic. So like for a lot of the skills that a Marine rifle company works up to during training, you have to be good at BZO, and you have to be good at tactics, you have to be good at fire and movement, you have to be good at loading a radio, all this stuff. You've got to do all that stuff, and then on top of that, you've got to have PMEs to teach the Marines about culture, about counterinsurgency, about sewer, water, trash, electricity. So it's a very challenging thing to do, but I think the Marine Corps, being a non-defeatist organization, has found, I mean, we've found a way to make this work. The brief I'm going to give here is Captain Mine's brief that he put together with the staff of Lima Company, referencing multiple documents, which we can get you at a later date. And this is really our approach during the second deployment to Ramadi. The biggest thing that we used was augmentation teams, CMO, which is civil military operations, and leader engagement. That was like our three-pronged attack against the enemy, and we'll hit on in depth on all of those. Augmentation teams were basically 13-man teams, 10 to 13-man teams, squad side element, that lived out in the city with up to 100 Iraqis. This is not a groundbreaking concept for the Marine Corps. We were doing this in the Medina Wars. Like Chesty Puller was a, if you will, augmentation team leader. But in current day, there's a lot of resistance to send 13 guys out into the city to live embedded with 100 Iraqi police, especially for us coming from the third deployment. You know, the Ramadi 1 deployment was a very kinetic environment. We were real resistant to put 10 guys out in the city for fear, you know, they may get overrun or you know, have bad things happen to them. The way that we got the augmentation teams set up was we had them led by a lieutenant or a talented sergeant or staff sergeant. Really, rank is nothing, talent is everything. Like in this fight, you got to find talent and ride it hard. You might have a kid who's just got a knack for economics or something. Find that guy and fucking put. It doesn't matter if he's a PFC, if he's smart, utilize him.
Can you give some examples of that?
We had a Sergeant Humphrey, who is easily more talented than 90% of the lieutenants I've served with. We frocked him to lieutenant and made him an augmentation team leader. And some of the stuff he did led the battalion with the way we were doing business.
What criteria did you use to identify talent?
Really, we would recognize talent by like what we needed. So like we needed 7 augmentation team leaders. We only had 4 lieutenants, and the model we used was a lieutenant would be the augmentation team leader, and just based off this guy's a lieutenant, he's got a certain skill set. He's usually pretty open-minded, flexible to do the economics and stuff like this. So lieutenants were good choices to be augmentation team leaders. We didn't have enough lieutenants to fill those billets, so we had to kind of look down the bench and see who we had left. And it wasn't, when we looked down there, we weren't looking at rank, we were looking at who can handle this responsibility. The augmentation team, not a squad. I think that's very important. It was a squad size element, but we handpicked these guys. So you had Lance Corporals and PFCs being effectively company gunnies and company first sergeants. 13 men living with 100 dudes. They're really like a mini company. And our company was really like a mini battalion.
Can you say more about the S1 through S4 staff functions being compressed down into that 13-man unit?
They were like a skeleton staff, and we tried to set it up for the augmentation team leader. You know, made himself submissive to the Iraqi police chief. It was the Iraqi police chief station that augmentation team leader was just there to advise the police chief. His unit then comprised of an S1 shop, which is admin. Do you want to go over all this? S2 intel, yes. S3 operations.
Specifically, I want to know how, in that 13 Marine unit, those functions were handled.
The duties of those for like S1, we had to like pick a PFC who's good at English, or good at administration type stuff coming out of high school. So maybe he was like secretary of a club or something. He's got to have the same skills that a first sergeant has to manage 100 Iraqis, keep all of their rosters, keep all this stuff. And the stuff we're talking about is not sexy, but it's very important, because if those rosters get messed up, those IPs don't get paid. And if those IPs don't get paid, now we've created a gap, surfaces and gaps, page 81 of Warfighting. If we create that gap, then the insurgents can target those IPs who aren't getting paid and pull them back to the insurgency. So that PFC needs to be a fucking stud if he's an S1 guy. Same thing for S2, S3, S4 across the board. So we were putting, as a Marine, you have a lot of responsibility because you're responsible for other guys' lives. But we're putting an enormous amount of responsibility on these 18, 19-year-old kids. And for the most, I mean, they're knocking it out of the park. They're picking talent-based dudes. They rose to the occasion.
So, third-generation warfare concept, surfaces and gaps, applies in a counterinsurgency environment.
Correct. Yes.
Well, if you have other examples of that, I'd be very interested, especially combined arms, combined actions.
Yeah. This next topic we're going to talk about is civil military operations, civil military affairs.
But before we go on to that, the other staff functions, S2, S3, S4, how are those handled in the 13-man unit?
In those units, those guys were responsible for that stuff internally to the Marines, but their main role was to advise the Iraqis. So that PFC, who's a intelligence guy, he's advising the Iraqi captain, and really in that bullet they out-cycle us on intelligence so fast that the like Lance Corporal intelligence guy goes to the Iraqi captain and pretty much asks him, what do you know what's going on with intelligence? For S3 operations, that guy's sitting down with a 40-year-old Iraqi major, and they're doing a schedule for a week. And you would think that like the lieutenant or his corporal Bravo would be doing this stuff, but those guys are so task saturated, they had to delegate those duties down to the lower level because they had so much other responsibilities.
And the S4?
S4 logistics, that guy, the logistics guy was liaison with our company Gunny, that we had so much, we were running so much distributed ops, which is very like distributed ops, decentralized. That's how you win in a counterinsurgency. We were so distributed that the third generation model of Gunny providing logistics to the entire company is impossible, would not work. The Gunny had to run like liaison with these 7 mini gunnies, if you will, and they would put in requests. So you've got Lance Corporals doing daily log stats, requests, fuel, forecasting how much fuel they're going to need and all this stuff. That's on the coalition force side. On the Iraqi side, these guys are helping the Iraqis identify stuff they need logistically, and then just basically brainstorming how are they going to get this stuff.
Did you reference the articles in Gazette on distributed operations?
We did. A lot of the stuff that we're looking at is just kind of pulled from different stuff. Distributed ops. We're talking to our sister battalions, 2-7. What did these guys do? What did 3-4 do? What did 1-6, the battalion before us, do? And trying to pull whatever working from these other units and use it in our model.
Okay.
Civil military operations. This one was huge. We did civil military operations while we were there. We focused on trying to get the essential services back up, which when we get to like a modified needs of the people